要跟老板报告你的 project 进度就平铺直述的说明吗？有没有不同的架构或者是很实用的片语，能够让听者更能进入状况，完全吸收你的简报内容？ So stay tuned to today's episode.Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管双语沟通力的 podcast。我们希望带给大家最实用的沟通工具，包括了成功人士对全球市场的分享、职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。Hi, I'm Sherry, founder of Executive Plus. As a language trainer and certified coach, I've trained hundreds of managers from Fortune 500 companies such as Dior, Google, Deloitte, and Yahoo.And
I'm Nick, Director of Communication Strategy at Presentality.I've helped startups raise millions of US dollars in funding and train the executives of publicly listed companies to present on the global stage.
Welcome to the Executive Plus podcast,
where you can take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Executive Plus podcast episode.Today, we're going to continue our discussion on how to frame out informative presentations. Whether you're giving a project management report to your boss or introducing a new product on stage to a room full of press, finding the right framing to get people behind your message is critical.
所以在第59集，我们讲到了怎么样做presentation 的 opening， 尤其是在针对于这种 informing 的这种 presentation。所以我们今天要延续这个 topic. So we're going to talk about the framing, the body of content, and some useful language takeaway.
In our presentation opening episode, we talked about the inverse pyramid. How you put out information starting with what is the key takeaway and then the most important information. When you frame out your whole presentation, you're going to follow this same format. What you will find for a lot of product release information or project management presentations is there's somewhat of a historical overview of what has gotten done, where are we going, and what's next. You can use this frame in order to do your informative presentation, but you start with what we talked about before. You need that key takeaway. And when you go through the evolution or you go through the timeline of your presentation, everything needs to go back to that key takeaway.
所以当我们在做这种 informing presentation， 我们常常会使用这种 timeline， 用时间的这种方式，就是陈述之前我们做过什么，接下来我们要做什么。但是在讲你这个 timeline 之前，我们一定要很重要的要把这个 key takeaway 要把它先抓出来。So kind of pulled out what's the most important thing that you wanted to talk about, that you wanted to convey.
And if you go back and look at really high quality product launch presentations, for example, when Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone, or when he introduced the first MacBook Air,He does this really great job of framing out one key idea that leads up to launching this new product. So, for example, if you go back and watch his iPhone presentation, what he frames out is every time that Apple releases a new product, they're revolutionizing something older and something that a lot of people are not using as commonly. For example, he frames out that basic computers went from this text interface to Apple creating the GUI interface. And then he talks about the personal computer going from a brick to the beautiful colored MacBooks that they developed. And then when he introduces the phone, he goes from this is what a smartphone used to be until we revolutionized it into what a smartphone is today. So he still actually goes back through the product history of Apple, but he frames it all out as we took a basic concept, a basic product, we revolutionized it to be this very personal piece of machinery that you will want in your home or in your hand.
所以就算在 Steve Jobs 他第一个 launching of the iPhone 他那个的 presentation， 你会看得到也听得到，就是他不是说照着他的 timeline 说我们先做这个，我们10年前做这个，然后5年前做这个，然后我们现在要推出这个。 而是它是把这个最重要这个 key takeaway 也就是创新先把它抓出来，说我们做的所有的 process 跟所有的 product 都是因为想要合乎这个创新，所以我们现在来推出现在这个产品也是因为这个 revolutionizing 的这个 idea。And
if you ever go back and watch Apple keynotes, I would really recommend going back to when Steve Jobs introduced products.Apple's recent keynotes are incredibly disappointing. Not because the products are bad, but because they lost this ability to frame out something really interesting and really new. They just use a lot of graphics. And so if you want to watch a master of this kind of informative product launch, go back to their older iPhone release, MacBook Air release, iPad release, and you can see that by mostly using physical product,less slides, but really good framing and storytelling, how engaging this kind of presentation can be.
So let's learn how to use this framing technique in our everyday presentation, right? 我们每次要跟老板报告我们现在所做的 project 的进度，我们要怎么用这种 framing 的方式来帮助我们呢
？To give you an example of how this works, let's go back to the idea we used in episode 59 about giving a sales presentation. And in that sales presentation, we want to show our quarterly growth, but we're going to frame it around this idea that the most important thing for us to push going forward is accessory sales, because this has showing the highest growth potential.
所以我们就来利用我们上一次在做 presentation opening 的那个例子，那也就是我们在报告 sales results， 也是 sales revenue results. From that presentation, 我们刚刚讲到了，我们重要的 takeaway 就是我们的配件，它是我们的，等于说是我们的明星，所以我们要把重心都放在我们的 accessory sales 上面。
Rather than just focus on our sales growth over time, I'm now going to add in this extra layer of how accessory sales have matched up to our overall sales growth or decline in order to justify why I think accessories are going to push forward. So I may begin with, last year, this is how we did in our sales numbers, and here's why accessories were only a certain part, whether it was growing or whether it was smaller, and what decisions did we make from last year to 6 months ago to now? What was our decision-making process? And then also talk about my decision-making process going forward. So this will be the overall framing of my whole presentation. In order to tell that story, I can actually use several different language tools in order to mark out these key transitions.
So the different language tool that we could use are very easy. 所以非常的简单，我们其实就是用一些很简单的 transitional phrases. For example, things like, shall we begin? Let's get started then. Or let me explain the next thing, or let me explain why we're making this decision. So if we put that back into our example, 所以如果利用我们刚刚所讲的那个 accessory sales 这个 presentation 里面的话，就会变成是像这样子。To understand why our growth in accessories has been so prevalent, we need to look back at growth from the last quarter. It's a lot of information, so let's get right into it. Right? So that's a lot of information, so let's get right into it. 就是我们的 transitional sentence.Last year, we had multiple pre-order for major holidays such as Valentine's and Mother's Day. This resulted in some success, but most people wanted to be able to touch the product before gifting it. What's surprising, though, is having the physical product didn't increase sales as much as anticipated. Let me explain why this is the case.
Throughout this frame, you can see that I'm talking about decisions that we made for each quarter related to growth overall, but also related directly to the accessories. And I'm using these language transitions to talk about the decisions that we have made and what's the outcome of them. Now, we didn't frame out the whole presentation because that would be really long, but you can start to see these steps, piece by piece, plus the language transition to build out this bigger presentation.
所以就是利用这些 transitional phrases, 比如说 what's surprising though, or let me explain why this is the case, 类似像这样子的片语 你可以再加上我们的 framing， 其实你的 presentation 可以变得非常的有趣，而且会让听众马上就可以记住你讲的内容。
Remember, the next time you go into your informative presentation, step 1, decide a key takeaway. Then, follow the evolution of your decision-making based on that key takeaway. Then, use these transitional phrases to talk about from stage to stage, before, till now, till what's our future plan.
So I really hope you guys like this podcast today, and make sure you share with your friends and like this and follow us. Bye.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
如果你喜欢我们的 podcast， 欢迎来追踪我们的主管英文 Executive Plus 的 Facebook。那也可以写信到我们的信箱 yourcareerplus@gmail.com。